The A6500 was a revolutionary camera when it arrived 3 years ago. Tucked inside that compact body were features like in-body stabilization, full sensor 4K video, and 11 frame per second shooting speeds. At the time, nothing else on the market could touch it. Its successor, the A6600, has to live up to that while also sharing a badge with two of our highest rated cameras ever, Sony's full-frame A7 III and A7R IV. On top of that, Fujifilm's X-T3, introduced last year, sailed past the A6500 as my favorite high-end APS-C camera. The A6600 is still one of the few APS-C mirrorless cameras with in-body stabilization, and it now has autofocus tracking and other promising features. However, it still has the same old sensor as the last model. To find out if it can break new ground like the A6500 and leap ahead of the X-T3, let's take it for a spin. First, let's look at the body. I'm happy that Sony has increased the grip size. It's not only easier to grab, it holds a much bigger Z battery that delivers 810 shots on a charge, beating the X-T3 and even the A7 III. The button and dial layout hasn't changed, so there's still no front dial or joystick, and that's inexcusable on a camera this expensive. Overall, the ergonomics, including the camera's awful menu system, are subpar compared to the competition. It still has a 5-axis in-body stabilization system that smooths out video and lets you shoot photos in low light. It's not quite as good as the A7 III stabilizer, but it's very effective considering the smaller size. Its main rival, the Fujifilm X-T3, doesn't have that feature. You'd think that on its APS-C flagship, Sony would have used a new sensor. Instead, I was disappointed to see that it had stuck with the same 24.2 megapixel chip on the last model. It has terrible rolling shutter, so it's not good for action shooting in electronic shutter mode. Weirdly, Sony makes the sensor used on the X-T3, which doesn't have that problem. Sadly, there's just a single memory card slot, and worse, it's SD UHS-1. That's another huge fault with this camera compared to the X-T3, and it's going to slow you down for action shooting. The 2.36 million dot OLED electronic viewfinder is the same as before and is yet again outclassed by the higher res EVF on the X-T3. As for the rear display, it now tilts up so you can use it for vlogging. I prefer it to the tilt down screen on Nikon Z50, but you'll need the optional $99 remote tripod to attach an external microphone. The A6600 only has a micro USB and no USB-C port, but at least it now has a headphone jack. That plus the tilting screen would make it an ideal vlogging camera, except for a major problem that we'll get to shortly. The shooting and autofocus performance is where this camera excels. You can hit speeds up to 11 frames per second with the mechanical shutter, which is fast but a bit slower than Canon's M6 Mark II. The X-T3 meanwhile can hit 20 frames per second in electronic shutter mode. However, the A6600's autofocus tracking in continuous mode is more accurate than those models. It now has 425 phase and contrast detect AF points, plus AI tracking powered by the Bionz X image processor. If you use the tracking either with or without face and eye detection, Sony's system is untouchable. It stays locked on your subject with no lag, delivering sharp shots in nearly any situation. Because the A6600 uses slow UHS-1 cards though, it takes ages for the buffer to clear. And it doesn't have a blackout-free EVF like the X-T3, which can make it hard to follow action. Overall, in shooting both animals and humans in action and slower settings, I rarely ended up with an out-of-focus shot, particularly in the subject's eyes. That's all we can really ask for, isn't it? While the sensor is unchanged, a new processor helps it deliver sharper, more natural images. Whether shooting action, street shots, landscapes, or night scenes, it delivered rich colors, natural skin tones, and crisp details. The A6600 is the best low-light APS-C camera with usable shots up to ISO 12800 and beyond. When shooting 14-bit RAW files in low light, you'll be able to find detail in highlights and shadows that aren't there on other cameras. All that said, the X-T3 has more resolution and delivers sharper shots. Sony has a mature lineup of E-mount lenses, including the latest 16 to 55mm f2.8 model I used to take the majority of these photos. Canon and Nikon can't match it. Only Fujifilm measures up in the APS-C department. Plus, if you have a full-frame Sony A7 camera or lenses, they're fully compatible. The biggest issue with the camera is bad rolling shutter. Because of that, you can't really use the electronic shutter for action unless you want terrible skew. The A6600 is acceptable for video, but nothing more. Quality is good with crisp full sensor detail and accurate colors. However, you don't have as many options during the edit because of the low bit rates and lack of 10-bit output. It's a decent vlogging and general video camera thanks to the flip-up screen and headphone output. Autofocus is also a strong point, especially in face detection mode, though it's not quite as reliable as Canon's dual pixel system. However, you really have to be careful of the rolling shutter, which can create a lot of jello effect. Fujifilm's X-T3 is better in that regard, and Canon's M6 II can nail focus more often. If you were looking for a mirrorless APS-C camera 3 years ago, the A6500 was the best option hands down. Now, I'm not so sure. There's no question that this camera can nail autofocus in just about any situation and give you natural colors and sharp detail. That's where it really excels. However, the sensor is showing its age and can't keep up to the X-T3 in terms of image quality and rolling shutter. I also wish it had 2 faster card slots and more advanced 4K options. If you're looking to spend $1,400, I'd get the X-T3 instead, as it's a better all-around camera. If it's resolution you need, take a look at Canon's M6 Mark II, which is cheaper and can also shoot faster. Unfortunately, the Sony A6600 doesn't live up to the standards set by its predecessor and the incredible full-frame A7 models. If you enjoyed this video, hit subscribe, and for more on cameras, check out Engadget.com.